It is Friday night, 7 p.m. Pacific time. And boy, do we have a jammed packed episode. It is Lord of the Rings all night long. It began with the forging of the great rings, and there is one ring to rule them all, and one cast to rule them all as well. I'm here with Brantley the Gray, Alexander Storm. I'm Radagast, and Chet Maddox. Well, I think he is
I think he's forging
walking
the
the.
rings.
He forging the rings, walking the fires of Mount Doom. We don't know. He's not with us this
He was
evening.
supposed to destroy it. I think he's really taking it to, do whatever he wants.
But we're here to talk about Lord of the Rings. We've got the new Amazon series that just debuted its first episode, season 2. We're going to talk a little bit about that in season 1. We're going to talk about the history of Lord of the Rings, a little bit about the books, definitely deep into the films, the lore, the Hobbit, all the amazing characters. We are super excited about this, and hopefully you all are too. This is Pixels, Plastic, and Ink. Well, what an amazing introduction. One of my favorite lines of the movie: for the time will soon come when hobbits will shape the fortunes of all. And guess what? Friday night, these 3 gentlemen will shape the fortune of your evening. So thanks for counting on us. Fellas, are you excited about Lord of the Rings? I know I am.
Yes. I love it.
Most definitely. Dr. Brentley knows that I wasn't a fan of the original trilogy, but I really got into The Hobbit. And I think the Amazon series is just the thing for casual people that don't know the series to get involved. And I'm a little curious about the Lord of the Rings anime, actually, which I didn't think they were going to go in that route. But again, I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, I from cosplay to books to the lore, Peter Jackson did it so well, right? There was lots of doubters. Could he bring this franchise to life in the epic fashion that he did? And boy, did he do that! And it kickstarted an entire brand new audience. And now with the Amazon series, a lot of other folks get to rediscover Lord of the Rings. I'm sure people are going back and watching the movies, just like the Game of Thrones for those younger generation that missed the first HBO series, and then you had House of the Dragon. The same thing applies. Why do people like Lord of the Rings? What about the lore, the characters are people drawn to?
Well, this has been going on. He wrote The Hobbit in the 20s, 1920s,
Amazing.
after his experiences in World War One. So, there is this very interesting real life experience that he puts into these things. Like, he saw war, he saw death, he felt he was fighting for humanity and, good in the world. So, that definitely informs a lot of the books, more the Lord of the Rings. But I think The Hobbit was his way of sort of getting into, you create this entire world, and not just the world, all 3 or 4 different ages, and all the history and all these characters, different races of characters. It's a monumental task, but yeah, J.R.R. Tolkien. Uh, I don't know. It's something so massive that it has endured, because in the '60s it picked up again, where I guess there was like graffiti all over like subways and things, like Frodo Lives, because the books were being republished and found again. And so, if you know the books, there is a hard cliffhanger there between 2 and 3. You're like, did Frodo just die? He got stung. Like, they moved it to the third movie, but in the books, Shelob gets Frodo in at the end of 2, and you don't know what happens yet. It's like, oh, I better read that third book.
So the original between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi moment
Mm-hmm.
was technically
Yes.
Mr. Tolkien that did it.
He
Makes
yeah.
sense. Makes
He
sense.
did a
So George
solo.
Lucas yet again steals from somebody else. Man, that guy. Look,
There's something about there's something about like if I see like how influential it has been over time to films.
exactly.
Like you watch the Harry Potter
Mhm.
films and you see the giant spiders and all, like it's like a lot of those things were pulled from Lord of the Rings and that lore, and then all these other fantasy epic tales. I mean, really is the foundation for a lot of the stuff you see today. So whether you go back and actually read the books, the source content, or you watch the films, you can just see like, oh, wait a minute, I just saw a movie like 5 years ago, some fantasy tale that looks very similar. Yeah, because it was written in the 20s and here we are. But
Mhm.
I think the other thing too that is always, I think, resonated with the audience is like there's a bunch of heroes and villains throughout both the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. But at the end of the day, you're counting on these tiny hobbits to save the day. And usually in a superhero type environment, that's usually the badass. And trust me, there are badasses in this and wizards and cool shit. But at the end of the day, you got, Frodo and his gang of hobbits that are really trying to save the world. And so that I think is really cool, right? I think, and to have that mindset back in the day. Mr. Storm, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think that's part of the reason, probably why it resonates with so many people worldwide.
Well, first of all, and we'll pull up an asset real quick. We've got the books on the screen, and obviously there's some editions that from the early beginnings, and obviously the ones where they placed on some artwork and everything. But I think it's a very good story where, like we've always told people, we love the David and Goliath kind of scenarios. You have the smallest, most unimportant species in all of Middle Earth, which are the hobbits, and they're basically are the ones that basically have to save everyone else. And so it's the little guy who is with, you got all these magical creatures and elves and trolls and orcs and everything, and it's like these just little peaceful little band of people that have to like save the entire Middle Earth. It's a beautiful story. I think it holds up only because you are right when it's like it's so influential in other people's work. Like, you can see here or there. Look, can you say that maybe Tolkien did kind of like taking a little something from Arthurian kind of like metaphors of throwing it? Probably so. That might have been his influences, King Arthur and some stuff. But he takes it on, and even to the point where this man creates his own language. Like, how much work? And like I said, we're writers, so there's no way that I have ever been that deeply involved in a set of characters to say I'm gonna make Elfin. I'm just gonna make my own like actual language, other than people that watch Star Trek with Gene Roddenberry and the Klingon or something. But that's deep. That's an actual understanding. When you look at the Middle Earth maps, you're like, it just like to think of magical lands and where they're going to be and continents, and I don't think, even with George and Martin and everything that he did with the Game of Thrones, and let's be honest, he's trying to rival Tolkien, because if you've ever seen how thick those Game of Thrones novels is, there's a lot of information in that stuff too. But somehow, I just believe that somebody that wrote stories in the 1920s is still kicking somebody's butt 100 years later, almost.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, and to translate that work into film
Hmm.
is a very difficult task because, as you all know, there have been quite the amount of books and graphic novels and comic books, most of which have not been great. There have been definitely exceptions, but to take this such historic franchise and then make it so great on the big screen, you gotta say it's an amazing achievement, Oscar worthy to say the least. And
Yes.
um, how do you think? How did Peter Jackson do it? Like, how did he make it? Like, it's incredible to see. I mean, we know some incredible actors, but what was the key to making it such great
uh,
film?
Tricking New Line Cinema into
Yeah,
giving him the
exactly.
money. Because
Yeah.
I love this story
Yeah.
of, he, I guess, was originally set up with Weinstein and Miramax, and he just wanted to do 2 movies out of the 3 books. And it's like, okay, that's kind of weird. So he worked on how to get it down to this, and then it sold the rights over to New Line, and they said, he went in and pitched them. They're like, well, wait a second, it's 2 movies, but it could be 3 movies, right? There's 3 books. And so, like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And he had this great, I guess, artwork and stuff like that, and whatever he did sold him, and got a ton of money. And it wasn't until afterwards that the guy actually said, like, oh, well, maybe I should see some of these movies that he's done. And if you've seen any
Basket
of his
case,
early work,
like, oh, basket case. This guy can definitely pull off,
yeah,
billion
Meet the
dollar franchise.
Feebles, right? It's an R-rated Muppet movie. Uh, it was very cheap schlock that he made. It was fun and inventive, but you don't give this guy like $500 million to do Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings. But whatever he did, he convinced him, and he was the right guy to pull this off.
Hmm.
Which that story is also beyond points of that happens in Hollywood all the time. There are way too many people that, like, the executives are notorious for not wanting to read. So sometimes it's just like, okay, hey, the guy can do it, and then they'll go back and read the work, like, oh my god, what did we just do? And that's like too common. But um, you give someone, look, without the Lord of the Rings, I don't know part of his career ever transcends, like, the D-list movies or C-list movies that he was doing. I don't know if he gets to that level. This is something that I think is in a la, like, George Lucas came out of nowhere, Steven Spielberg came out of nowhere. There are people destined to do something. And Lord of the Rings is just one of those, like, great series that I don't know if they could reboot this series. If they went ahead and said, let's get the best directors, let's get the best writers, let's do them again. I don't know if this is one of those, like, Gone with the Wind. Maybe you should never touch it and just leave it at that and just add different story lines to it. I think what Amazon's doing, it's very respectful. That's their version. We're doing ours, and we're not trying to touch it at all, because it's just, when you think about it in just the lore of films, again, how many times have we been at conventions and you've seen numerous characters from Lords of the Rings? I remember
Yeah.
we were seeing Lords of the Rings before cosplay was even big. I was like, what is that character? It's like they were making their own costumes due to some animated show that was done in, I think, was it the 1970s or early 80s?
Yeah.
And people were showing up, and I didn't even know who the characters were at that point. So this is the kind of, like, fever pitch kind of thing that people wanted, and to see it on the screen. I remember everyone was talking about the Lord of the Rings films, like, oh my god, I can't wait to see this. And I was like, wow, this is like really big. Like, I didn't really think it was that huge, but it is. The folklore, the whole mystique of the characters. Again, I think Dr. Brentley and I were talking about this movie when it first came, and it's like, I don't have a clue of any of these characters. And then you sit in the theater, and then you see the magic that Peter Jackson did, and you're just amazed. Like, my God, like, this is, very few projects can you say are close to perfection in Hollywood. This is really one of those where it's like, I don't think we're going to ever see something like this done on this magnitude. Because while the Harry Potter series is great, I don't think it even stands a rivalry to the Lord of the Rings series. And even the Game of Thrones, I just think it just is one of those things that stands on its own, and it didn't disappoint fans. That's the major key to it. People walked at that theater impressed. That is extremely hard to do with material that far back.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
they can
go ahead, Brantley.
they can make it they can make so much more stuff because he did all of this history. Like a lot of, he only wrote the like 4 or 5 books actually out. The rest of this stuff is like just outlines, histories of characters, and vague descriptions of what's happened. So, you can go in and flesh all that out and create Lord of the Rings content for years. But you can,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, Hollywood has a way of doing this, go back into the originals because there is still things that was left out. So you can go in and make them longer, and but you're right, it is one of those things they probably shouldn't touch because everything about every one of those movies, it was cast correctly. The look is amazing, the design. So yeah, they should leave it alone.
I don't
Which
think
I think don't even,
I don't think they'll touch it. I don't think they'll touch it.
which, let's not undermine the work that he did just developing Weta. Like, here's guys in New Zealand that he's like, I'll just make a special effects crew. And like, these guys were doing like work that even IOM were like applauding. And they still continue
Yeah,
to do this. There's people to go to New Zealand just to see those sets built. You know, I don't
Yeah.
understand how this could ever be reduplicated on any point. Maybe 100 years from now, maybe they might do it. We'll be gone, and we won't have to care about
it'll be
continuity
all
or anything
AI.
like
It'll be Lord of the Rings AI
that.
version. You can't. I think you can't take Peter Jackson's genius here, but you can't take away the cast and the acting as well. And
No.
you talk about Weta, but that the how that cast bonded. They got the tattoos, and they were so close, and the acting just felt so right. They got the characters so right, and the cool thing about it is you did have some stars, but there wasn't like a mega star, which I think
Mhm.
made it amazing, right? Like the closest you had to that, what could you say, is like maybe Ian McKellen from but he's not a
Not
megastar, right?
really.
Orlando Bloom wasn't really,
No.
you didn't have anybody like even like
I would say
if you
Liv Tyler might have been the most famous
well
Maybe
out of the
Elijah
so.
cast.
Wood,
Maybe so.
Elijah Wood
Mhm.
maybe a little bit, but there wasn't a
Maybe.
But he
megastar.
was, yeah, like a child star,
Well, here's the funny
Mhm.
thing, and I'm not going to sidetrack us, but these roles were actually first presented to major Hollywood
Oh,
stars
sure.
who
Mhm.
did not accept. And so,
Mhm.
if this were to happen, what would the movies and trilogies have been? Let's just go down the list really quickly, just for fun and giggles. Aragorn, who we all know is one of the best characters. He did such an amazing job. Nicolas Cage was offered the role of Aragorn. Would
God,
Lord of
they
the
dodged
Rings
a
be
bullet
the
on that
same?
one. Yeah, they
Would he?
dodged a
Would it?
bullet on that one.
Now, here's an
Wow.
interesting one. Russell Crowe was offered the role as Aragorn and turned it down. I could definitely see that in that era, that time frame, what roles Russell Crowe was playing. But then again, would it work? is the question.
I can't see the matching tattoos with Russell Crowe. I just somehow I think the cast wouldn't have bonded as well with that year Russell Crowe, because Russell was, let's be honest, between the two people that's ever done the Hobbit films, Russell Crowe is a dick, and everyone knows that Hugo Weaving is a dick.
Well, look, he
you
was
can only
going to
take
take
one on the
on.
set.
No, he was going to take on the ring rates with a telephone. So,
Exactly.
And then the last one, Daniel Day-Lewis turned it down 3 times. Now that would have been
he would have been good.
He's just a character. He would have just got into it. And then I don't know if you all were aware, but Stuart Townsend was actually offered the role.
Well,
and then
no, they filmed with
like
him
for 5 minutes, right? And he's like, okay, that's it.
They filmed a couple weeks with him, and then we're like, you know what? Sorry, this ain't working. Which that's gotta hurt most of all, right? It's like, we've seen what you're doing. We don't want you here anymore.
You're out. Like, don't even see you. We booked you a flight. And just to wrap things up, we're not going to go to all the characters, but obviously Gandalf, an important character.
Yes.
Sean Connery as Gandalf. I don't.
You shall not pass.
I mean, that line alone would have been worth it. I would have. T-shirts, memes, but I'm glad that didn't happen. And then Christopher Plummer was also
Christopher Plummer
he could have been good.
Yeah. And then that would have been neat because, obviously Star Wars. Well, no, was he in Star Wars? Did he have a cat?
No,
he never got a role in
that was
Star
Christopher
Wars.
Lee.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we had Liam Neeson as Boromir.
Liam Neeson would have been good.
And then a few others. Ethan Hawke is Faramir and Uma Thurman is Arwen. So it's kind of like they dodged the bullets for most of these.
They did,
so thank goodness. And in retrospect, it's easier to say that, but maybe Uma Thurman could have played. I don't know. It just felt really good. And I'm glad. Your all favorite characters before we, expand into kind of maybe the Hobbit world a little bit, but your favorite characters in the Lord of the Rings, the 3 films. I would love to hear what resonated with all of you.
Probably Gandalf or Frodo. I do like Frodo. You see yourself being put like this horrible task before you. It's like, there's no way I can do this, but I gotta do it. And everything goes wrong, and hopefully you got a couple friends to help you out.
Makes sense. I think probably I think because of his screen presence, maybe Gollum, because of the fact is that he, it's such majesty to see that done for that performance, and to know that somebody's back in motion caption and they're just bringing it. And it's like, wow, it's like that performance on its own, even though it's digital, we don't see, but the behind the scenes stuff, you've got to appreciate that this person literally brings. I think that, and like when you think of like Frank Oz and Yoda, when they were like, oh, that's a silly puppet and everything's not going to work, and yet is the most emotional piece in the film. And the same thing with Andy Sudeikis, right?
Circus.
His performance, like he brings life to this one character. And when we get to the Hobbit, it all becomes such a tragic story of, my God, what just like, that's why Dr. Brenton and I was talking today, and we were like, I think for someone like me that didn't read all the series or anything, I would have appreciated The Hobbit first and having a clear understanding of some of those characters, and then Lord of the Rings. I think it was extremely hard to catch up when you just had the Lord of the Ring characters and there's like hundreds or thousands of years of history and you're trying to catch up. I think The Hobbit was a little bit more easier to digest, knowing this is where this character is, and then it made sense where, this what these characters are from, or this what these guys are from for the next film. So that's just my personal opinion. Probably set me on fire for it.
I think Strider, Aragorn, he just does such a badass job in that role, like vulnerable but also badass, and just like the introduction to him in the films, and he just did an amazing job. and I think that definitely that character was pretty damn incredible throughout the whole series there. Um,
So you're talking about, I think my favorite bit of him is Weathertop, where he takes on all of the ring wraiths and, throws the torch and fighting them off. So that was his first day. So we talked about he got,
wow.
the call, right? Well, you got to come. We're shooting. That was his first day, the Weathertop scene, and it's so iconic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
they knew they made the right decision immediately.
Oh yeah. For the best scene I think of all of the Lord of like, and he's definitely featured in it, is what can men do against such reckless evil, and then ride out with me, and they just go to defeat the just an amazing sequence of like the CGI just killing all the
Mhm.
orcs. Like, it's just that whole sequence. I mean, people are like, well, I'm not into Lord of the Rings and it's too talky. Just watch that 15 minutes battle sequence.
Mhm.
You'll be into it. Trust me. So the Hobbit films. So Mr. Storm mentioned they could have come first. Obviously, they wanted to start with like the big powerhouse of the books, but the Hobbit came not as a fast follow, but it did come, and obviously a string of three films. What was your take on the Hobbit series compared to the Lord of the Rings franchise?
For me, it was my favorite series out of all of it. I love the characters. I love the mythology. I love the history. I was able to give a lot of catch up, and there were things that were put into it where it's like, okay, now I'm starting to get this. Now I'm starting to understand. And of course, this is without saying, and Dr. Brentley knows, if I could build a shrine in my house, I would. The greatest dragon that has ever touched the screen, Smug, the dragon that loves gold. He is my favorite character. Like I said again, I've got some. A large diorama of him coming at one point, but it's like he is the entire reason Cumberbatch's voice is amazing. But that dragon has so much vengeance, and Dr. Brentley and I, because he is the professor of this, is that he was telling me that I guess the dragons in Lord of the Rings have this magical power. They're such great. He can write down to the piece of gold that's missing. He knows. Like, I'm like, well, what the hell is this that he knows every piece of like gold pieces, shillings all over the place? It's my favorite character. I love, and if you haven't watched the films, we're gonna ruin it. But from the second film to the third film, when he takes off, he's like, I'm gonna burn that village down. I'm like, I can't wait to this third film.
Yeah, that was
He
such a
is by
great scene
far.
to that film. I
Wow.
remember, like, he's like just takes off, and there he goes off to the village. You're like, well, okay, okay,
Glad I don't live there.
yeah. I love Thorn Oakenshield, like that character too. Like, again, it's like that the struggle with power a bit, and like demons, and trying to reinstate the family name and take back the
Mhm.
wealth, and but also again has his bad character traits, but can be a badass. I thought he was a really great character, and that actor did an amazing job playing that. I think they all did an amazing job, but I thought he was actually
Oh
really,
yeah.
really good in that film. And then after watching the first one, because I've seen that guy in a few films, but he wasn't another one that wasn't gigantic superstar. I'm like,
Mhm.
wow, he played it so well, because I would have never assumed that this actor being interviewed was him. So again, it boils down to incredible acting performances.
Yeah, that guy. I actually watched him on a BBC Robin Hood show.
Huh.
He was, I think, he was the sheriff, so he was the bad guy, uh, and it was awesome. A great little show. Uh, Probably the early 2000s or so. Um,
Mhm.
so it was before he got The Hobbit. But yeah, he was really good. And The Hobbit was the first thing that Tolkien wrote. And so it is a much better introduction into the world because he
Hmm.
himself was figuring out, okay, this is how I have to break it down to an audience that knows nothing about this. So yeah, I think Lord of the Rings can be a little harder to start with, because it wasn't until I actually saw the movies, because I read the first Fellowship of the Ring first, and then I saw the movie, and I didn't really understand what was going on in the book until I saw the movie, and then I'm like, oh, okay, wait a second. And then I went back and I'm like, yes, this makes so much more sense. I can picture these characters, what they're doing, because there is a lot of stuff that he just doesn't
Yeah,
flesh out in those books because he's got so much story to tell, that he doesn't
yeah.
really give you the emotional stuff, and that's what the actors brought to it. It made you actually, I guess, touch the book characters a little easier, because I could see them in my head now and hear them emote rather than just trying to create some crazy stuff that's on this page.
Well,
I
here's the thing I've always wondered is, sorry, Chris.
No, no,
Here's the
go
thing
ahead.
I've always wondered if he, I wonder if Tolkien, because there's so much like done for this series, because he only had an infinite amount of time to work. I wonder if he had another 20 years, another 25 years, how much more would he have devoted himself to this series? Because this is a lifetime mission. This is not something where you can be done with it, like, and move on, like a la like Stephen King. He can move on from a series of books and go on. I think this was all consuming, and I believe if he had another 20 years, we might have got another 10 books out of this series, because it's just so you it looks like it's just open ended.
Yeah,
Yeah.
his son actually has gone through all of his notes, and he's actually published some books based on his father's notes of what he
Mm,
wanted to do.
wow.
So there's that out there. But yeah, he that's how much material he was coming up with.
Hmm.
Well, before we jump in, because we talked about the extension, like the next things in the Lord of the
Hmm.
Ring universe, we've got the Amazon series, and then the recently in debut trailer of the animated series that's coming in December, which looks really great. But one thing that was announced sometime in May this year was a new Lord of the Rings movie called The Hunt for Gollum, that would be Peter Jackson produced and that Andy Serkis would direct,
Wow.
which is interesting because I don't know what source content is out there, if this is being written from scratch. And if so, I mean, theoretically, the Rings of Power, there's some obviously some new things there too. What's your take on like extension of the films? Because we said don't redo, but
Yeah.
extend. Andy Serkis is the guy. Peter Jackson's involved. Is this a risk of these one-offs, or is
Well,
it like this could be great?
it's I think the Hunt for Gollum is an appendix in one of these
Okay, so
books.
it is okay.
So yeah, it is a thing, and so the whole point is just where he tracks. Uh, I think it's I don't know if it was Gandalf, but someone is tracking. Oh no, it's Aragorn. Aragorn is tracking
Really?
Gollum,
So
and
when does
it's
it take place?
so it's I think it's sometime in when the first book was happening, but before he
Huh.
meets Frodo. I think it takes place like 5 or 10 years before.
Mm,
So because the whole thing is Gollum went from this place under the mountains to getting caught by Sauron's minions, and then he was tortured and found. They got the name Bilbo Baggins out of him and the Shire. So there's this whole time frame, and I think it was 60 years or whatever from when Bilbo saw him in the mountain to when he's captured. And so that's part of what the hunt for Gollum is, because uh, someone knew, I don't know if it was Gandalf or not, but that there was something that they needed to get from him, and yeah.
Got it. Yeah, yeah, you're dead on. So it takes place 17 years after Bilbo
mhm.
Baggins' 111th birthday party, just before Frodo leaves the Shire. Yep. and the wizard Gandalf fears Gollum may reveal information about the One Ring to Dark Lord and sends Aragorn to find him. So, are they going to get? That's the other thing. Are they?
I mean, you can
They got to
do
get Vigo. How
with
could
all the
you?
stuff that they can do at
Yeah,
Weta.
I
They
mean,
can do
they cannot not get him.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do that without, I mean, that would be so stupid. Let's be honest. Like, you got to bring him back. I hope they bring him back.
And
Wow.
Legolas is kicking at this time as well. So
Yeah, and both of them are not doing much. I mean, they're still working actors, but it's not like they're doing amazing projects. So wow, well, this could be a significant money maker for the franchise. Very exciting stuff. So the TV series, the Rings of Power, Amazon series, season 1, definitely ups and downs. And then now we have season 2, the first episode release. So your take on the Rings of Power comparative to the films?
Well, I'm going to say that I think if there's a way that you can attain, first of all, Amazon paid a crap ton of money. Look, we were all talking about, it's like, is Jeff Bezos going to mess this up? Because no one had faith in Amazon as a studio to do this correct. And I was absolutely shocked. I thought they accomplished 2 major things here. One, they did not tag into Peter Jackson. I was wondering how they were going to do this series, and they really made their own series. And then 2 is that if you absolutely knew nothing about Lord of the Rings, if you were just a casual person that tuned in, this is probably the most easily accessible source material that you can get in and feel like you're not burdened down with hundreds of years or thousands of years of mythology and everything else. They break it down. I know a lot of people have had problems because of the so-called political issues, what they perceived in the film, but I think the casting and everything on this was absolutely appropriate due to the so many different species of characters and things like that. I think it absolutely works, and I think Dr. Brantley and I were laughing about this. Like, I think it was like a year and a half before they started shooting. In the Hollywood trades, they had put up a casting call, and and I remember we laughed about this for hours because this was in the era of political correctness, mind you. But they said we need freaks and people with mutations, and I would say they just said, like, if
you've lost a limb, if you've only got one eye, we're looking for you.
If you're not nice looking, we want you. We want you. And we were both laughing our behinds off because that's the only time where it's like, no, as little prosthetics as possible. We want to get the authentic you. If you're a freak, we want you. And I was like, my God. I was like, this is going to be
good. You freak, you're an orc over there. Okay.
The characters were fantastic. The elves were great. The scenery was great. The production on this rivaled Peter Jackson stuff. And you're like, wow. But it's just it has one thing in the story that I absolutely, as a writer, we always try to do. You start off the first season and it's bam, you're ready to go. They built this up, it's like they started off like you're going immediately down the roller coaster, fast shooting right into the series. There is no major build up. Let's take the first episode and slowly walk people through it. No. The first 15 minutes of episode 1, you're in the midst of stuff and you're ready to go, and it's moving. I love that about this series.
Yeah, you can take your time, explain the stuff when you need to, but also get people invested in the characters as quickly as possible. But also, if you just spent like $500 million for something, you're not going to cheap out on the actual production. It's like, no, this better look like the best thing that's ever been produced. And they're pretty close.
See, I thought he was going to do it because, again, this is when you see Amazon and the things that were going to happen. Look, we had this is really, I think, before the first or in the part of the first season or some of like Jack Ryan, and they hadn't had the Reacher series yet. So a lot of the stuff they were doing, I think they had that Orlando Bloom series that was like, good lord, what are they putting on? And
Mhm.
so you just didn't have any faith. But like again, 10 minutes into season one, you're like, oh wait a minute, this is gonna be good. Like you just like they had settled. Even the opening and the music was like, okay, you spent some money on this, let's go.
Yeah. And I just watched the first episode of season 2,
Yeah,
and that also starts out with a bang.
yeah, it
Uh,
does.
it's they're doing a very good job, I think, of being able to get people in and hook them. And this is something that you can just start at season 2 if you want to,
Yes.
and go along for the ride.
They had
So,
a nice recap of season
mhm.
one to get you prepared
Yeah.
for season two. So if you just, you don't want to take the time to go back, I believe it was 10 episodes or so to watch that, you can jump right into two. And it's, again, man, it's the writing on this is immaculate. Like, there's very few times where you sit there and you're like, okay, it could have been better. A lot of the Game of Thrones stuff, there was, well, it up in tears. Sometimes the writing was great, sometimes it teetered off. There's not a moment of this entire series and the surprises that happen. I would tell people to go back and watch the first season because there's a lot of stuff that happens and you're like, holy crap. Like you're sitting there, the visual stunning imagery, the grand cities. I love how they use a little map of Middle Earth. You're here and they move you all the way over here. And there's so many classic storytelling antidotes that they do in this to freshen it up. And it's just, again, the writing is just right there. It is probably one of my favorite series, and it's one of the few series in today's day and age with how they're doing streaming. Because Dr. Brentley, myself, and Rad are old enough to remember when you used to have 24 episodes a year, and then the next, like 3-4 months
Mhm.
later, they had more episodes that you went. Now we're going between 2 to 5 years before they make series. You don't miss the time frame. It wasn't like, oh, I forgot the story or I don't understand what it is. Like you were waiting for this storyline. I did not have to catch up on season one. It was fresh in my head still because that's how good it is. And then it moves in season two. And as I'm watching, because they dropped 3 episodes today, which you'll be watching this Friday, so Thursday, because we're taping it. They dropped 3 episodes. Now it's like you're at this point where you're like, I know there's not many episodes left of this. So I need to enjoy this while I can because it's probably going to be another 2 years before I get to see season three.
Yeah. And I think, look, if you're watching this cast, you're a Lord of the Rings fan. You're probably in
Yeah.
maybe some of you are just getting into it or maybe casual. And I would just say, give it a shot, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
season one, there was some ups and downs. I think you really have to like stay through it. Like don't give it some time. Um Season two's kicked off with a bang.
Wow.
The movies are great. It takes time investment. There is a bit of
Mm-hmm.
like paying attention. It's not your popcorn movie. You got to figure
No,
out, right?
oh,
But
what's going on? Yeah,
yeah,
you
yeah,
cannot do that.
no. But it's also not confusing like, the
Yeah.
the Star Wars the
Mm-hmm.
original, where you're like what's going on and this emperor and that like it's not that. But it does
Mm-hmm.
require like the complexity of what's happening with these characters and the history but it's really fun and really well written. And this TV show is actually a really great example of them again sticking to like the environment and the characters, and it doesn't feel like it's a detachment from the
Mm-hmm.
films. I think they did it
Well,
really well.
even the actors that they cast, it's like a young version of Hugo Weaving, of
Yes.
Kate
Yeah.
Blanchett.
Mm-hmm.
And you can believe that because they have such lifespans. I think this is
Yeah.
a couple hundred years before
Mm-hmm.
Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
So, you can get away with it, but there is something about them that does remind you of those other characters. Also, you don't really have to know all the names because all the
Yes.
characters are very visually distinct. So even if you don't know the difference between one or the other, you know who they are and what their backstory is essentially.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
agreed. Well, something that's up and coming this holiday season, trailer just dropped recently, and that is a new animated feature, The War of Rohirrim or the Rohan, and this takes place. When did it say it takes place? I think it's like
It's
uh,
before the
I
Lord
forget
of
I
the
was reading.
Rings.
Yeah,
Is it?
183 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, set in an anime style. Peter Jackson less involved in
Yes.
this. However, in terms of the actual animation and design, Richard Taylor, the creative director of special effects for Weta Workshop, and also the illustrators from the Lord of the Rings trilogy work are involved, have been involved in this. So it's not like it's a full new production and creative team, but Peter Jackson just definitely doesn't have his hands involved as
Hmm.
you would maybe hope. So what does that tell you? Do you think that this has, I mean, definitely different style, cool trailer. I don't know if I'm not a huge fan of this style animation, but if it's written well, I'm all in. What's your take?
I was actually shocked when the animation so much or the anime. And I naturally thought when I heard there was going to be a Lord of the Rings animated, somehow I thought it was going to be maybe CGI, a little bit more like Beowulf or something with some of these other ones where it was going to be heavily done like that through Weta. So when I saw this style and it was the 2 dimension, I thought it's an interesting take. I know that anime is a point of contention in the United States when it comes to films. I think it does well for like TV shows, but film wise, I don't know if we have still gotten to the point where this is going to drive massive people into the theater. I think it's different. I think it's a completely different approach. But I know there's a certain portion that there are anime fans, and then there are people that are not fans of this. And you know, I would be curious, especially coming out in December. And December is like, look, all the big pieces that they want to do for Oscar nominations and things like that. They start putting some heavy hitters out. I'm going to be curious to see what this box office, because if this does well, then it's gone to show that our American audience are now truly accepting anime and the style of it. And if it doesn't, then it just goes to show you that we're still, that is something I think overseas this probably will do well because anime is widely accepted outside the United States on a lot of ranges. But I'm going to be interested to see the box office on this.
Yeah, I was surprised at the look because now it's different. When we were coming up, uh,
Hmm.
anime was a smaller niche market,
Yeah.
but kids have grown up in the last 20 years with it as a much more popular, diversion. And the manga is taking over even a regular American comics.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking that this is sort of to get the younger audience in, and they think, well, if you're a real old Lord of the Rings fan, you might go anyway. But I think it's an attempt to go with a new style, get a
Hmm.
younger audience in there. Also, they may have just been like, you know, these anime movies are awesome the way they do
Hmm.
them. Why don't we just let one of these guys have Lord of the Rings and see what he can do? Because that's kind of what it looks like. It's visually very stunning. Also, it was interesting that you say that the design was from some of these guys that worked on the
Yeah.
originals because the character faces looked different, but all the design stuff
Hmm.
did
Hmm.
very much look like those original films. So, that is something that's good to keep the whole theme and the feel of all of these things now in line. So you can watch Rings of Power, you can watch War of the Rohirrim,
Hmm.
you can watch the original Lord of the Rings, and it all feels like it's the same universe.
Yeah. 100%. It was a good trailer. I think for all the Lord of
Hmm.
the Ring diehards are going to watch it. I'd be curious to see how it does. But I think, look, if the story is great, even if you're not a giant fan of the animation, you'll stick through it. It doesn't always have to be the most amazing animation. And I know animation is definitely hot. Anime is definitely hot. And it would be a really great thing after Lords of Power, Rings of Power, to get into this, and then what the future holds for the franchise. The thing that Lord of the Rings has suffered from has been merchandise.
Yes.
That is the thing that I think has not been as relevant, which probably takes it out of the limelight when comparing all of these top franchises, the Harry Potters, the Star Wars,
Hmm.
the Marvels, right? They didn't really get, you didn't get a lot of TV. Even Game of Thrones actually did this much better. And maybe if Lord of the Rings released during that time, there would have been a lot better social media presence and other
Hmm.
things. But in terms of T-shirts and toys and McDonald's Happy Meals and things, just didn't
Hmm.
quite click. And maybe it was intentional because definitely more adult themes. But if you look back at some of the merchandise and now the cool collectibles you can get now, the
Yeah.
ring wraith that's like, $2,000 sitting there on your desk with the badass sword, or, Dr. Brantley and I was telling him about some cool Diamond Select Lord of the Rings figures that are
Mm.
available with the really cool display packaging, but the initial figures were not very good by Toy Biz.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Because it feels like it is a bit lacking, and I'm wondering if we'll see. I haven't seen anything with the Rings of Power. I can't imagine it'll be too much with the anime. Maybe with this new Gollum movie coming out, they do something much better. But that's where I think it's held back a little, is the merchandise.
Well, they did a lot of it. I mean, there's definitely a ton of stuff out there, but a lot of what they focused on, I think, was the higher end stuff because they knew this
Yeah.
is not a kids franchise. This is for, English scholars. This is
Yeah.
for that type of audience, all the way down to some teenagers that want to see some cool sword fights. But they did, these beautiful, and Weta Workshop made them, the recreations of swords, all the different ones, Sting, of Andruil, all the different character stuff. There's versions of the ring that has the etching in it.
Hmm.
All these things that are very expensive compared to, a $20-$30 action figure. So I think that's where they focused a little bit more on, and also probably made a killing because it was all very high end stuff that was expensive.
Well,
But did they
this is
lose the
where
ability to attract the younger market?
A
Right?
little
this
bit.
Or, you know,
this is where I'll put my Toybox Chronicle credentials in here right now. It's a big mistake, and it's a big mistake because there are people. Obviously, how many conventions have we gone to? And you've seen dozens of Frodos walking around. It's like, there's a giant, giant wizards and staffs and everything else like that. You've seen it, and I think that now, Allah, I think McFarlane did some Game of Thrones ones, and he's not the guy to do this. Um, but I think if there was like Star Wars Black Series version of the Lord of the Ring characters, I think that's an untapped market, and I think that they would do extremely well. And it's as big as Star Wars. How many releases could you really get? And not to mention from the dragons to the orcs to the there you've got
Trees. You got trees, for
Haslabs,
God's sakes, you can do.
giant trees. You've got play sets. It's an untapped market, and I think that compared to there are figures to Game of Thrones, and let's make no mistake, uh, there's a lot of things that is in Game of Thrones which we love, but there's also a lot of like subject matters and everything that there's I'm in Best Buy and there's a actual Game of Thrones figure and some kids looking at it and it's like there's no way he's watched this show, you know.
Yeah.
The Lord of the Rings, you can have the youngest fans watch the Lord of the Rings. There are, the animated series. There's so many different reading the books like Harry Potter. There are ways to introduce them into it completely different than that. So I do think that that's a major, I think, faults by, and maybe it's because the token estate, there's a level, maybe they do want to find, because, they have to approve all that stuff as well. So maybe they've set a hard line point where we don't want to see it like this, but I really would like to see, some versions of it as a Star Wars Black Series, a little bit higher end. Maybe it was, not saying Super 7 prices wise, but sweet spot of $30-$35, highly articulated, really nice, great packaging and design work. I would like to see that, and I think that there's a fandom that would pick that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be at the store and see like the Game of Thrones Jamie and Cersei 2-pack. That's not a good look.
But it's an exclusive though, and you should see the play set.
Oh yeah, it's the tower. It also comes with falling brand.
In the Lord of the Rings franchise, we just talked about some of our favorite characters. Well, there was a hell of a lot of villains and evil and bad guys and orcs and ghouls. So, who was your favorite villain? I mean, Smog, definitely. We know Mr. Storm, but I'd love to hear who it was.
The Balrog.
Yeah.
That was the best. I mean, you thought he took down Gandalf, but oh no. Man, that was the best opening of a movie I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what's going on in the books, you think, oh, well, Gandalf is in that first movie, and man, he kicks the Balrog's ass first 5 minutes. It's amazing.
Yeah,
It's still the baddest character, I think.
I will. Well, look, I don't. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's just the way I'm thinking. But Smug to me is the hero of the story. I don't even see him as a villain. What are you talking about? Like I said, my man just wanted, wanted some gold, wanted to sit there in peace and be left alone. They just couldn't do that to him. So I don't see him as a villain. Yet he's my hero. He's the number one dragon in all of fandom and franchises. Smug is at the top of the list, and then it's like the ice giants from or the ice dragon from Game of Thrones, they're just second distance. Ring of Fire, number 3. Those dragons, although they weren't that intelligent, but they were cool. And then I'd probably say Puff the Magic Dragon at 4. So there's some guys up there, but no, it's look, this is
Smog has a rent controlled apartment. So he's doing fine,
Yeah,
so and
he's probably got some air conditioning there for all that gold. But he has such a definitive look, and his voice is right on. And the minute this character comes on the screen, you're equally intrigued yet frightened at the same time, because this is a maniacal dragon, and it's completely different than what we've seen in films. Mostly when you see, like, I think, was it the what's it, Dragon Rage or something, when Sean Connery's the voice? What's that movie? And
Dragonheart.
Dragonheart, yeah, and the dragon's like cool and
Dennis Quaid.
like that. And, yeah, and they're like fist bumping and everything. So they don't really have this kind of thing. But this dragon's like, no man, just give me my gold, leave me the hell alone and everything, and told those trolls to go F themselves. It's right up there. So every time I see him again, I again, that's why they need to have more merchandise. I need like a giant version of that character sitting there. Maybe I'll talk to Chet when he's back on 3D print me a Smug.
You need a Smog HasLab.
Bigger than Fing Fang Foom.
Yes. Yep. The ring rates obviously are just amazing. But come on, Wormtongue. Underrated, a manipulative influencer POS character, but that he did such a great job in playing that character. Such an amazing job.
Best teardrop in history on film. He looks over all of the evil before him. Oh. So
Well,
good.
let me tell you something. The work that they did in this and all the degrees, and you notice it only really kind of works in when you have the orcs and the elves and everything. Because the next movie we saw orcs and elves in was the worst piece of dumpster fire they could have ever done, and that was Will Smith's Bright. And if you ever want to see Lord of the Rings done wrong,
See a
it's
lot.
the
See,
orcs and elves and things like that in that
yeah.
film.
See, a lot of people think that Will Smith's career ended with Chris Rock's
Oh
slap, but you didn't watch Bright because
no,
it was
no, no,
way
no.
before that time. It was
No,
way
no,
before
no,
that
no.
time.
You
Yeah.
talk
Now, I
about
will
it.
say an
You talk,
honorable mention
yes,
because I think the best acting in this whole thing with all of these great people is Andy Serkis as Gollum.
yes,
When
yes.
he
Easily.
has the monologue with himself, he's got Smeagol talking to Gollum, and uh, that is just one of the best
Yeah, it is.
scenes. And much less, you're like, oh, wait a second, that's not even him. That's a digital
Yeah.
creation.
He's
Uh,
the greatest. He's the greatest, and I'm glad that he gets to direct
I think so.
this.
Yes.
So I have hope.
well, he did
Uh,
do the second Venom movie, so
It's okay. I mean, you're
And
allowed
who
a couple
hasn't
of
done a
blips.
Venom film at this point?
Come on, come on. I'm telling you, Venom 3 is a sleeper. I think it's gonna be better
I
than
want to
you all
sleep through
think.
it if that's what you mean.
Hey, you saw Madam Web, so this is the expectations. I mean,
It's
if you
pretty
saw
I'm
low.
used to being beat up in a movie theater. Yes.
yes, exactly. By the way, Dr. Brantley took another one for the team.
He
So
did.
if you
He
haven't
did.
checked the Crow movie review that just came out, he was one of a handful of people that watched that in the box office. So check that out. It's on the Shadow Nose Network, and promise you will not fall asleep like he potentially was going to, but suffered through the entire film.
There
to
were
get through.
3 other people in that theater with me, so I was afraid to fall asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't want to
Well,
disturb anyone.
isn't
Don't want
that
to wake them up.
isn't that video titled "Love Doesn't Die, but All Hope Does"? When you watch this.
Oh man, so no soundtrack could have ever saved that film. So
No.
well, gentlemen, any last thoughts on the Lord of the Rings?
It's one of those heavily explored kind of things. I know we do things on the network all the time. Maybe Dr. Britton and I might have to do some retrospects on the whole Lord of the Ring phenomena and keep this going because it is such a great piece of fandom. And if there's Star Wars, there's Star Trek, I think the Lord of the Rings is highly up there, and I'm glad it's getting another resurgence.
Yes, it's definitely one of the pillars of fandom.
100%. Well, before we go any further, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in on this fine 7 p.m. slot on Friday night Pacific time. Please subscribe, like, share, comment. We appreciate your viewership here as you help this channel grow. There's a multitude of different things on our channel. Whether you're a Pixels and Plastic Ink subscriber or watcher, you've got the Toybox Chronicles every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Pacific time. This past week, we had a special guest, Mr. Storm and Chet Maddox. It was the Legends Verse creator who talked about how to really sufficiently build and track your Marvel Legends collection. We've got Ace from Ramen Toys several weeks ago who created amazing vehicles, and guess what, in just a few days we're going to have the 18 van, the Punisher van, whatever you want to call it, the bread van. So he's coming back. I'm talking to the toy community. They're talking about I'm ordering 3 black, 3 white. I'm like, what are you all doing? I'm building a shield van, I'm doing this van, I'm doing that van, all these different types of things. I'm like, I can't wait, man. And so movie reviews, wrestling content, is so much stuff on the channel, so check it out. But we can't go any further without talking about a couple of our affiliates, and one being Entertainment Earth. There's a big sale happening, Mr. Storm, I believe this weekend.
There is, sir. There is. Up until Monday, September 2nd, into summer from Entertainment Earths, our good friends and affiliates over there. As you can see up on the screen, we have our actual code. It's the ee.toys/PPI cast. If you use that in there, they've got some great spending options for you right here. Spend $100, save 10. Spend 200, save 25. Spend 300, save 50. Chat. Don't spend 300. Don't spend 300. But we're always proud of the Entertainment Earth affiliate. It's always a pleasure to have any of our affiliates come on, and they've been just very kind to us.
And speaking of that, we also always have to give shout out and love to the mom and pops. So if you want the big pre-orders and all the big stuff, you go to Entertainment Earth. But if you're looking for some of the rare, the vintage, the stuff that's local, well, look no further than our original affiliate, and that is Toys versus Games.
Toys versus
Games. I'm here with the man, the owner.
Tony at Toys vs. Games.
versus
Games.
Oh.
Well, any last words for this evening's cast? We've got our brothers and sisters casts, Mr. Storm.
Absolutely. Love our buddies over at the Sorlac Digest podcast, Darth Moocher, The Fallen Fett, Scott Solo, and Grand Admiral Fritz. If you we say this, they are the best damn Star Wars show on YouTube. And if you want a Star Wars education, you better get over there. And they are on Wednesdays right after our Toybox Chronicles. So 8 Pacific time, you can catch them. Always entertaining. I'm watching. I know Dr. Brantley. I know Rad. We're all watching. We love them. It's always great to have a partnership up with such a great YouTube channel as well. And it's one of many. So keep looking out. There's going to be more people dropping in and doing things. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. And we will see you next week. This is PPI.